but I know my change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living. I'm not afraid to die. I'm just a church boy. Jesus said he was gonna meet me somewhere beyond the sky. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know my change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother. I say, brother, brother, please help me, please. Seems like every time my brother keeps knocking me down, down on my knees. Whoa, it's been too hard living. I'm not afraid to die. Jesus said he was gonna meet me beyond the sky. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know my change gonna come. I have one more for you. Like I said, I'm just a church boy, and so some of you all may know this song. If you do, I'm going to ask that you join in with me one more time. Tonight, as we're talking about healing racial trauma, it's just my belief that God is a healer and that he's able to give us the healing that we need. Exceedingly, abundantly, above all we could ask or think, according to the power that worketh in you. To do just what he said he would do. He's going to fulfill every promise to you. Don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. He's able. Would y'all do that part with me? I just want you to say he's able. Say that with me right now, right here. He's able. Come on, if you know it, I really want to hear you sing this time. God is able. God is able to do just what he said. He's going to fulfill every promise. So don't give up on God. Whoa. Said he's able. Come on, I want to hear y'all say that. Say he's able. Say he. We're going to take it up. God is able to do what he said that he would do. He's going to fulfill every promise. So don't give up on God, 'cause he won't. Said he's Apostle, say it one more time. He's able. I still can't hear you. Maybe you'll sing this part with me. Let me hear you say that. Oh, 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 he's able. Help me say. Oh, and he's able. 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 Whatever you need, my God, he's able to give it to you. Whatever you need, whatever you want, he's able. He's able. Jesus is. He's able. 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 Oh, he's able. He's able. Said he's able. He's able. He's able. He's able. He's able to touch hearts, to heal minds, to save lives. He's able. 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 Don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. Don't give up on God. He won't give up on you. Don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. Don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. He's able. Thank you.
Yo, let's make some more noise for Stephen Ivy. I love gospel music because, one, I think it's the hardest, most difficult genre to play, the musicians, but they're all ways like incredibly talented when they do it well. Not only that, but also like the parts when they ask you to like, yo, sing with me, and like they modulate like 4 keys. It's like, yo, I can't go up there. But all right. And my man Steven was like, yo, come on. Especially with the He's Able song. It's like, yo, sing He's Able with me. It's like, I can't sing all the way up there. But I love that song. So make some more noise for Stephen Ivy and gospel music. All right. I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. And we're going to get right into our discussion. So as I introduce y'all, just come on up and take a seat. Let me switch hands. Okay. The first panelist is Patricia Morency. Also, please forgive me if I don't like enunciate all the like lettering and you guys' like credentials and stuff. Like, so yeah, forgive me, but they got credentials, y'all. First is Patricia Morency, LCSW, MED. right? That's how I do it? Okay, good. Pronoun she, her, and hers is a mental health clinician and the diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator at CAPS. She has dual master's degree in social work and human sexuality education from Widener University. Yep. She has worked in the community mental health, higher education, and research institutes across the United States. Her specialization is in working with diverse and marginalized populations through a trauma-informed intersectional lens. She also provides trainings in anti-racism, media education, and social justice. Please welcome Patricia Morency. And then next we have Dr. Jordan Harris. Ooh, there we go. Dr. Jordan Harris has been working as a counselor since 2012 with advanced training in hypnosis and couples counseling. He helps people with a variety of issues. Additionally, he offers consultation for diversity and inclusion and is currently a co-author on a textbook on culture and diversity for counselors. You can find him at jordanthecounselor.com. And last, my sister almost didn't write a bio. And she was like, yo, just say I'm your sister. I was like, no, like, come on, man. It's time to get a bio. Like, you got some stuff now, All right, so next is Joy McGowan, MA, MHC, LAC, EFT trained. She is local therapist and local community activist. She serves as the secretary for the NWA NAACP branch, 60AC, is that how you said it? She is passionate about helping others heal from trauma wounds. She believes we can make meaning of our pain. She strongly believes that identity, belonging, and dignity are key to the healing process. She often speaks regarding mental health and minority communities. You can connect with her for therapy at thejoshuacenter.com. Welcome, Joy McGowan. Okay, I'm gonna curve this a little bit. So I can see y'all. There we go. All right. There we go. Yep. All right. Let's just jump right into this conversation, right? So this idea of racial trauma, let's start off by defining it, talking about the history of it. Where does it come from? Let's just dive right in. Anybody?
I'll start.
Please
We were
do.
just talking
Please
about this
do.
back there. So this term, racial trauma, kind of started getting talked about around 2006. If y'all follow, there is a doctor, her name is Dr. Joy. She is from London, and she kind of talks a lot about racial stress, post-traumatic slave stress, which is similar, that she tries to connect it to post-traumatic disorder. And so I think it kind of really starts with her conversation about how racism and slavery has impacted African Americans here. And then from there, we see that 2006 is where we see first articles from researchers talking about this term, racial stress, racial traumatic stress, or even more recently, I saw an article that was calling it racism-based trauma, which I thought was really important, how it kind of changed more recently, because they are trying to get away from people of color having to think that you have this trauma because you are black. But really you have this trauma because of racism, because of a system that has impinged itself upon you and have put you behind. So we're not crazy. It's not because we're black that we have more stress, but it's because of racism. Because racism exists, we tend to experience things a little bit, we tend to experience the world a little bit differently. So I think it starts there, and then more importantly, I think I've been researching a lot about how from 2006, we look at 2007, 2008, and we all remember what that was like. President Barack Obama was running, in 2007, 2008, he's elected. And then from there, we have an uptick in instances of black people being hurt, being murdered, being discriminated against, all in our media. Something that Jordan actually, Dr. Harris, informed me about when we had some conversations on the side was during that time, 2007, 2008, we're also seeing an uptick in technology. So Twitter, Instagram, all these things are like really popping. And so we get more, like we can see more of this stuff happening. We have a lot more easier access to it. So I'm not sure what you would add, what y'all would add to that.
I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that I think of it in two dimensions, right? Like I think there's the historical dimension, right, that lingers in this country, and that some people continue to deny, right? And then you also have like the everyday sort of things, right? Which is like when your boss, I have a client whose boss says things to him, and it's like, it's racist stuff, right? And so it's like in the present things that he's having to deal with now. And so I think of it in both ways. So that's the only thing I would add to that.
Yeah, I agree with everything that has just been said. I guess I would also add that a lot of the research that has been coming, about race-based trauma, racial trauma, was actually coming out of a critique and criticism of the DSM. And so the DSM is the what I call the big purple book of mental health disorders. And so it's the book that clinicians typically use to diagnose someone with, let's say, generalized anxiety disorder or major depression disorder and PTSD. And so historically, the people who have been creating these diagnoses and naming them and labeling them have been, majority cis white men. And so it's really been coming out, especially with the critique of the PTSD diagnosis. Usually when you think about that, you think of people who have gone through war, things like that, and there really wasn't a discussion about how that can show as a byproduct of racism. And so that was a lot of the reasons why the research and everything was coming to kind of back that up and to justify that, the people that are creating and updating DSM, it's been updated, I think, it was the 4 when all this research was coming out, and the 5 came out 2013. Every 20 years about so, a new one comes out, and so you see there's a lot more conversation about the cultural considerations when you take into that, how, anxiety and depression and other types of disorders show up differently depending on different cultures, and it's not just, we're talking about majority white American or Eurocentric cultures.
And I would add to what Patricia is saying, this term, this like race-based traumatic stress, it is not in the DSM. And I think that is the most encouraging thing that I've read in the research. They wouldn't call it a diagnosis. They would call it a mental health injury. And I think that's really important because what we don't need is another reason to pathologize being black and having a different experience in America. We don't need more people pathologizing us. So I think that's really important. A lot of the research would say this is a mental health injury because of what you experience throughout your life, like what Jordan was saying. It's like little instances. It's at work, it's at the grocery store, it's you go to Old Navy, it's like anywhere you go, you can experience something different. I mean, it's when I go to take my kid to the doctor's office, right? Majority white practitioners are looking at me like, are you sure your son is hurt? Like, yes, check him, please. So it's everything.
Well, let's talk about that a little more. Like, what are some specific experiences either that you guys personally have encountered or through like clients that you contribute to this idea of racial trauma?
I mean, I think for me, I can give an example of both. I've talked to a few clients, and this is a common story, so it's a common story, so I'm not giving away anyone's information of growing up in a biracial or interracial household and having one side of the family treat you differently. Like that's hard to have your mom or your dad treat you differently or have your grandparents treat you differently because you're Asian on the other side of the family, or because you're black on the other side of the family, or native on the other side of the family. And then I think, kind of what Joy was saying, like, I think in some ways with the microaggressions, right, little things happen all the time. So yesterday I was like walking home, and my neighbor was like, I got to get you to play basketball against my son. And he's a white guy, right? And it's like, what? What did you just say to me? Which, it's like, and then I'm literally walking in the door. So like, how do you even respond to that? It's like, I guess I just keep walking. I don't know. But I have to take that in, right? So those are two examples.
Yeah, I would add, definitely going on, going on with the everyday examples, the microaggressions, the kind of slights, to us it's not a slight, but, to the outsider, it may be something that they don't even realize that they're saying, backhanded compliments. And so what's interesting about race-based trauma and stress is that it's cumulative, right? So they always say it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, tiny cuts. But I also think it's a combination of, the everyday life struggles that people have to navigate as they're navigating in the world as a person of color. But then also we talk about like the historical effects of systemic racism and the byproducts of slavery, right? The fact that right now, historically, there have been racial disparities in terms of access to healthcare, education, employment, stuff like that. It's all cumulative throughout generations, right? And so we have to kind of navigate the byproducts of like systemic organizational racism that is a byproduct of centuries of oppression, but then also the everyday slights that you may navigate on your, as you're walking about the grocery store and things like that. And I think also having that being invalidated, right? Not seen by the majority is also another byproduct of racialized trauma.
Well, let's talk about, I like what you said, Jordan, about like, that instance, you said you were walking in a house, but you still had to take that in, and you saying that it's cumulative. What does that look like? Let's talk about what it looks like in the person. Like how do they know what it feels like throughout their body, different things like that. Like what does it look like and feel like, and does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I was when you were talking, Patricia, I was thinking through something that I was listening to on a podcast that talked about how racial trauma is one of those things that our body doesn't metabolize very well, just meaning it can't break it down. Normally, what you'll hear a lot of people say about trauma is that your body can figure out a way how to handle that and break that down. Like a lot of people don't have to go to therapy to deal with trauma. You may be able to do that if you have like a really good community and you can like process that right. And so usually some type of traumas have like an end date, like this happened, this is a one thing, it's over. So now your body is able to like get back to a place of normalcy. When it comes to racism or race-based trauma, your body does not know how to break that down, because what I like to say is like you go to sleep black, you wake up black, you're still black. Right? And so the body is always kind of in this hypervigilant state of like, okay, wait, did they mean that like that? Was that me? Like, maybe I'm tripping. Let me stop. Like, this is not a race thing, right? Like you're constantly bringing everything through that filter. And so a lot of the research is saying how that is just one of the things that is just a little bit harder to break down. And the body was not designed to stay in like a hypervigilant state forever. And that's essentially what happens. And so what I would say is like, personally, when I know that has been triggered in me, like maybe I feel like my heart racing, maybe I feel like those really bad butterflies in my stomach. Maybe I find myself having a little trouble to breathe, like feeling like choked up because like I know I'm gonna have to say something. Like, why did this person just touch my kid's hair? Please don't touch his hair. Like I'm gonna have to speak up for my 7-year-old kid. And then I want him to know he can speak up for himself too. And it's just feeling really awkward. And so I think you notice like all these things happening like in your body. And I think that's really important for us to recognize.
Yeah, I think of it in along two sort of big things, right? I think one are the ways that our bodies mobilize and speed up. And so whenever especially for reasons that you might not understand or that seem out of proportion to the event, right? So if someone says something to you and your heart rate goes from resting to like pounding, and then you feel kind of nauseous, and like, and then maybe you feel weepy, or maybe you feel angry. You're like, why am I so mad about this? Like, those are sort of the things that I would say are the speeding up symptoms of trauma. But we also, in the past few years, have discovered that there are like slowing down symptoms of trauma, which are actually almost more dangerous for us, right? So maybe we get depressed, we feel hopeless, we feel lethargic, we have fatigue. A lot of people walk around with fatigue that are dealing with the after effects of trauma. Out-of-body experiences, right? And experiences where you feel frozen. You know, those are like the slowing down variety of trauma. And those are also, those are symptoms of trauma.
Man, y'all are just saying so much good stuff. It's like, oh. I guess the next question I want to ask is, we've kind of already talked about this, like, from a personal standpoint of, like, you know, experiencing things out in everyday life. Can we unpack of what it is like / feels like to experience these things, like via internet, via TV, via media? I know that, like, I mean, we talked about it recently that, like, I mean, you said it that, you know, I'm sure there's no coincidence that as technology increased and that we become more social, that these things increase as well. So can we unpack that for a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, with social media and everything like that, it's just so pervasive and accessible. And when I think about that, I think of specifically one example about, while on the one hand, I think it is a wonderful thing, it's not a wonderful thing, but I think it's a wonderful thing that people are able to record instances of violence as is happening to, you know, to show the world that this is something that is happening. It's not just a one and done instance. The after effect of that that's negative is that you're constantly exposed to it. And so there has been discussion about just being exposed to violence or police brutality videos has a negative impact on your being. It's kind of like secondhand traumatization, right? So you haven't experienced it personally yourself, but you're seeing someone that has so many overlapping identities to you, can remind you of someone that you know, yourself, and so that is also another byproduct of it. And it's something that can be accessible like 24/7. And I don't know about you, but I know that as soon as I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is look at my phone. And so there has been this conversation about ways to kind of draw back on your screen time as a way to help yourself and your mental well-being, that you don't necessarily, while it is a good thing to be up to date in news, and you know, it's very important to know what's going on, kind of controlling how and when you access that information, because if it's constantly, all the notifications are popping up and you're just looking at it over and over again, you know, you're going to be constantly in that hyper vigilant, that hyper arousal state. And so it's really important to kind of take a break on that. So I think, especially within the past 10 to 15 years, that is something that has been affecting our society in a way that, you know, before social media hasn't, right? And we get exposed to things across the country and around the world. So it's a good thing that we are able to, you know, be a global society and be aware of these issues, but at the same time, it's like we have to kind of really be able to regulate and understand how it impacts our mental health and monitor that.
I mean, you were saying that, and I'm just thinking, yeah. I mean, I've seen people be murdered. Like, I have never seen that face to face, but I've seen that now. Like, when these videos were coming out, right? It's like, that cop just shot that person, they no longer exist. Like, that's a heavy thing to have to watch. And I think that there's a lot of research coming out now saying that our brains aren't meant to handle that level of constant hits of fear. Our brains and our bodies are not designed to handle that.
That leads me into the next question. What are some of the long-term effects of this stuff? You know, what are some of the long-term effects of?
Can I brag on your sister for a second?
Go ahead.
Can you talk about the ACE?
Yeah.
Because I think that's like one of, if you're looking for symptoms.
That's the ACEs, right? So the ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. There are a list of 10 questions They end up talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and whether or not you've had a loved one go to prison, whether or not your mother was abused in the home, whether or not you were abused, whether or not you were sexually abused. And if you have a particular score on the ACEs, you are more likely to have lots of problems. You're at higher risk for preventable mental health, for preventable medical health conditions. And so normally when you look at BIPOC communities, you see a lot of us, like a lot of my mother, my father, my grandparents, they all had diabetes, high cholesterol, like all these like medical things, right? And so when you want to know like what are the long-term effects of like trauma, violence, racism, you think ACEs, you think my body, what Jordan is saying, like my body was not designed to handle all this fear-based intake. It is because the body literally shuts down. There is a book called The Deepest Well by Nadine. Her name is Nadine Burke. She is a physician in California, and she's a Black woman, and she writes this book about the ACEs and how they impact us, like BIPOC communities. And the most beautiful thing I learned about that book was how literally the more we stay in trauma and the more we stay in this place of like toxic stress, there's these things called telomers on our lifespan and our genetic code. They literally just start to fall off because the body was not designed to carry that much weight for a long period of time. And so then you have movements like Girl Trek, which is a Black organization that's all about encouraging Black women to walk or run. And they have these movements because they start talking about how they remember how their grandmothers died in their 60s and their 50s and their 70s, and they should have lived longer, but they didn't because of the racism and the trauma that their bodies have experienced. So that's real. The ACEs are a really important part of the conversation.
Yeah, the ACEs are very important, and I think the thing, so I haven't read Naomi's book. I've heard her talk, and I got introduced to it through Vincent Felitti. He's like sort of the first guy who did it, an old white guy, right? And I think what was fascinating to me was, if you think about, and he basically goes through it and he says, in a middle class, predominantly white sample, people who've had high number of ACEs, I think it was 6 and up, have exponentially more issues with like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, strange medically unexplained illnesses, right? And addiction, right? In addition to mental health issues. And the thing that hit me was, if that's true with people who generally in this society are privileged, like how much more in my own community? It was really like scary. I mean, he tells one story about a lady whose her arteries were calcifying.
What does that mean?
They were getting hard because of scar tissue, because basically because her body was working too hard for too long. Like you just imagine like your lungs growing layer after layer of extra skin because they just can't take it anymore. Like. That's what this chronic activation, this chronic hits of fear does to your body. So it's not just emotional, it's also physical.
Yeah, you want to say something?
I mean, I think those two have done an excellent job explaining that. I don't really have anything else to add about that.
And like speaking personally, like that's a crazy thing to me is that like our bodies are literally altering themselves because of this. Like people are literally living less, like, the lifespan is being shortened.
20 years.
That's crazy.
I think six and up, you have 20, if you have more than 6 ACEs.
If you have more than
20,
4.
More than 4.
It's so low.
Your lifespan drops 20 years.
Drops, gone.
Wow. If you have 4 more check marks on the ACEs?
Yes.
So like if
It's
I had
only 10.
a family member that went to jail, if like, what are some other checks? Like,
You have a family member that went to jail before your 18th birthday, you were fondled, sexually molested, or in some way before your 18th birthday, you had a mother who was hit, bitten, basically as physical abuse. You saw physical abuse in your household. You were a witness of violence. Someone in your family had a mental health disorder. You witnessed someone in your family commit suicide, or you know someone in your family who did commit suicide. What were the other ones?
But
Like-
you just named
And
6. So
neglect.
if you
That's
just
just
have
six.
Neglect.
if you just have 4
Neglect.
of those, you lose
if
20
didn't-
years.
If
Like
you had to think about whether or not you were going to eat, where you're going to sleep, like, if literally one of the questions is, if someone in your household did not love you, did not say nice things to you, did not make you feel loved and cared for, that is an ace. It's like, dang. Like, just, I didn't feel loved. That's huge.
I mean, in light of that, I want to like talk about the African American community now. Like, in light of that, how more likely are we to have those things? And then, yeah, like just how more likely are we to have those things?
I mean, I think it goes in two different directions, right? Like, kind of like what you were saying, right? Due to the systemic nature of some of that stuff, I think in many ways we're disadvantaged, right? And so I think we know that there are more ACEs generally in marginalized communities. The flip side of that also is there are things that aren't on the ACE that we have to face. So a lot more is the answer to your question. A lot more.
There's things that are not even on that list that we experience that still contribute to, that have the same effect on our bodies, have the same effect on our minds,
Exactly.
have the same effect on our place in society and how long we live.
Yeah, and I think of like in terms of context, we're talking about the ACEs. I don't know if y'all have seen, there's been kind of reports out there about how like this past year in COVID, like collectively, globally, there's like this, I don't know how much it said, like a year or something like that affecting our life expectancy. And so we already know that BIPOC communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID. And so just to put that into perspective, that this past year alone has already contributed to, something that has already been stacked up against us.
I also just want to, this is something else that I think was really important. If you look at the research, there's a really important study called the Dutch Winter Hunger. And basically during World War II, the Dutch were invaded by Germany, and they were starved out. And the Dutch apparently are really good at keeping records. And so they tracked the Dutch kids who'd been through this period of starvation throughout their lifetime. And when they compared them to the people who were born just before them, right? The ones who had been through this period prenatally, when they were in the womb and then born, they had higher rates of depression, anxiety, obesity, hypertension, all these things. But the crazy thing, why this is a really important study, is that the Dutch apparently keep really good records. So when they track their kids, the kids of those people who'd been through that famine, those kids also had higher rates of anxiety, depression, obesity, hypertension, all those things. And so there's also a level at which I think this is passed on from generation to generation. I remember talking to people who are in their 60s and 70s, and a lot of the stuff that people think is a long time ago, like, was it? And so I think that's the historical dimension that I was talking about earlier, that is still stored in the body.
Not only is it accumulated and stored in our own, but we get it from our parents that, what was stored in theirs is now transferred to us as well. In light of all of this, how can we begin the process of like changing this? Like, where do we start? Because this like seems like, man, like, okay, I gotta deal with the effects of my parents. I got to deal with the effects of like everyday life. And then I have to deal with the effects of like the system that I operate in, going to the grocery store, working my job, like, and then I might have to deal with the effects of the social media of someone in Nigeria or someone in New York, someone in Galveston. I don't know. Like, I got to deal with all of these effects. Like, how do you, like, where do you even start in the process of coping, of healing, of just, like, getting to a good place?
I'll start.
It's a big question. We got to take a beat to
I
think
know,
about
we're
it.
like-
Yes.
It's so heavy.
It's so heavy.
It's so heavy. Okay, so something I always tell all of my clients, especially when I work with Black women, is to listen to your body. Listen to your body and honor whatever your body is feeling and experiencing in that moment. I think sometimes because we are so used to to having other people gaslight us about what we're experiencing, that we do that to ourselves. We're like, that didn't really happen. It did. What do you feel? Where do you feel it? How bad does it hurt? Where does it hurt? And so I always just like try to encourage myself and other Black women to listen to your body and honor what the body is telling you to do. Emotion is designed to be experienced and to be validated and acknowledged. And so I need to believe it myself, and then I can like share it with my brother and be like, yo, this happened and this is crazy. Right? Like, I need to believe it, that it really happened, and it needs to be okay that it happened to me, and then I need to be able to like go. So listen to my body, and then also I always talk about you need to have a tribe. You need to have a group of people that love you and care about you, who can help you process what happened. So if you don't have, you don't need to be like 30 people, but I'm telling you, like, I have a group of people who love me and care about me, and so when things happen to me and I have to question it for myself, I got people I can turn to and be like, yo, like Jordan has been one of those people for me. Like, there was some crazy stuff happening in my life, and Jordan, like, he's not working in the office now, and my man's FaceTimed me, and I'm like, you are not FaceTiming me out of the blue, fam. Like, stop it.
It wasn't out of the blue, though. Come on. It wasn't out of the blue.
Yo, you supposed to text people before you FaceTime them, right? Right, like, yo, you available? Like, don't FaceTime me. He FaceTimes me, and I'm like, fam, like, literally almost cried. Like, I'm done. I'm about to be done, because now, like, you know that something hard has happened in my life, and you were like, this is really important. I need to see you. I want you to see me. How you doing, sis? Right, like, so you gotta have people in your life that you can turn to, or that will turn to you when all hell has broken loose. So listen to your body, honor it, and then turn to your people. If you don't got people, find people. Like, I pray that the Lord gives everybody people. Like, you've gotta have people. You're not supposed to do this alone.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just to add on in the importance of support networks, for those of you that are struggling and may not have anyone, I feel like for a lot of us, we may be the only person of color in the workplace or in a classroom setting, and so it may be hard to kind of find people to connect. And so one of the things about social media, I know we talked about, some of the negative effects about social media, is that you can be connected to people around the world. And so if it is hard for you to find people in person in your own environments, I think just being able to tap into social media. Meetup is a great app that people use that's just based on interests, but they have a lot of things going on, and especially during COVID, you've seen kind of this uprise in virtual stuff. And so, like I said, if you can't find someone in your own community or setting, you can also find people around the world and around the country to connect. So I think it's really a really good one. Another point that I would like to make in terms of dealing with all of this, it's twofold. I think of practicing mindfulness, which is kind of going back to what Joy was saying about paying attention to your body, and then also being able to pay attention to the type of thoughts that are going through your mind. So mindfulness, really quickly, is it's not pushing thoughts away. It's not the whole kumbaya, I'm going to try to stop this thought from happening, but it's actually letting the thought go through and pass through. A lot of times we prolong our suffering by preventing and not wanting to think about certain things or feel certain things. And so it's really important for us to accept it. And once again, accepting doesn't mean that everything is right and okay, but just acknowledging the reality for what it is the first step for healing. And then in terms of paying attention to the type of thoughts that you're having, and I am going to preference this conversation a little bit differently. I talk about this, and this is called cognitive restructuring, if you want a clinical term. I structure this differently depending on the type of communities I talk to. So definitely diverse, marginalized communities, like BIPOC communities. I talk specifically about the difference of challenging unhelpful negative thinking. So usually when we're as therapists, we talk to people about, okay, there are millions of thoughts going through your mind, and some of them can be true and some of them can be untrue, and a lot of times they are irrational thoughts. And so being able to challenge that and say, like, this isn't really what's happening. However, I feel like in our communities, a lot of things that we're thinking about are true. Right. So it is a very different conversation depending on who you're talking to and what they're being affected by. So yes, there could be some thoughts that are irrational or not really, true or accurate, but then there could be a lot of things that are true. So you think of things like, I think the government is against me, or things like that. It's one doctor might diagnose you as paranoid schizophrenic or something like that. But in a lot of times we're having conversations where if there are laws being passed and policies that are being passed that are affecting your life, like, that's true and that's real. And so I usually kind of steer the conversation and talk to you more about what is helpful for me in this moment, right? So there might be a lot of things that are going through, but if kind of sticking and prolonging the suffering of things that aren't really in my control, and letting those go. And once again, not saying that everything is perfect or okay, but being able to focus on what is in your control. So yes, we can't really control the government policies in a global scale, but I think if we can mobilize maybe communities, or think of some ways that you or people around you can deal with these things, if that makes sense. So usually when I'm talking about paying attention to negative thoughts, really thinking about, yes, it could be inaccurate, but also like what is helpful and what is within your control, and being able to kind of let go of the things that are not in your control, because that's prolonging your suffering, thinking that you can put a stop to something that you really don't. And I know it might sound counterintuitive, but I think for a lot of people that's freeing, because I think we're used to, especially Black women, being able to tackle and solve all the world's problems, and we can't. And so just being able to let go of those things that are outside your control can just relieve that stress.
Yeah, I would just say, you guys are sort of getting into like some of the micro moves, right? Especially as therapists, how we help clients. I think I would just say this. I firmly believe, and I think that the research is out on this, that we need community. There's a famous long-term study done on indigenous Hawaiians, and looking at some of the kids who were delinquents and some of the kids who weren't. And the ones who weren't delinquents, and if you think about delinquents, what that really is that's behavior that's fueled by ACEs, right? So people who have high ACEs. The difference between the kids who had high ACEs and did well in life and the ones who didn't is they had one person in every life stage who they could rely on. So it wasn't always mom or dad, right? It was a teacher or a coach or a pastor or whoever. And then when they got out of childhood, they had a community. For some of them it was church, for some of them it was the military, for some of them it was something else, but that was the other thing. And I think we often, when we're hurt in relationship, we often fear relationship. And I want to completely honor that. And so I know that when we say that, that can be really triggering for some people. You want me to trust? And what I would say is, to your point of control, only as much as you feel comfortable. What's your growth edge, right? You don't want to be past that, but you want to be kind of in that zone where you're okay. This feels safe enough to trust. And once I feel safe here, like really safe here, I'm going to take one more step further. So don't feel like that's something that has to happen all at once. Something that can happen just enough that you still feel comfortable.
That's really good. I think, and I'm glad you said that, because I think that's one thing that, like, people don't think about. It's like, yeah, get community, get friends. It's like, yo, okay, that's hard sometimes. I saw a meme the other day where somebody was like, no one ever talks about Jesus's miracle that he had 12 close friends in his 30s. and I think now, like, too, like, I think our society is extremely individualistic, right? And so I think that contributes to this to this as well. And so I'm glad that you said that like, one, you need this, but seek it out at a pace that works well for you, and that's going to be healthy for you. So that's good. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about, like, what are some how can we help the Black community as a whole, as a community? What are some things that could be helpful in dealing with this as a community, specifically as the Black community?
I think we need more infrastructure. I think there's this idea that Black people don't go to therapy. I don't believe that. I know that's like countercultural to say that, right? But I think we don't go to people who we feel like are unsafe. That's what I think happens, right? And so if I think about infrastructure, if I had $1 million, I would hope that I could give some to St. James so that they could have a counselor in the church. So you would feel safe going to that place to see that counselor, right? Like, that's the sort of thing that I feel like we need to have.
And there's a lot of places we don't feel safe. No, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think as a community, like, continue to have conversations like this and to destigmatize, mental health and mental illness. I know a lot of conversations I have with folks in the Black community is just, being afraid to show weakness, or saying that, reaching out for help is a sign of weakness. I hear that a lot, and I can understand it, and I can empathize with that greatly. But I think if we have conversations like this, kind of like we have conversations about other issues, like medical issues, like, heart health and diabetes, we can have conversations like that in our community. But when it comes to mental health issues, we don't really see it in the same light. We think of it as like a defect, a personal defect, or something's wrong with them, or I'm weak, right? I should be able to take all on this on the own. And I think in order for us as a community to kind of strengthen each other and build each other up is to be like, it's okay to not feel okay right now. I constantly say that with people. It's okay, and I think as we as clinicians, having those conversations, and what I really love about us clinicians and BIPOC clinicians, and I don't know about, maybe I'm speaking for other people, but I think we show more of ourselves, right? Because we're working with these communities. And so being able to mirror that, like, we don't all have our stuff together, right? I know that I'm still constantly struggling. And so I think it's a way to bond with clients, but then also show, like, it's not like everyone has things perfect. Like, we still struggle too, but how can we help each other?
How can non-people of color, like majority culture, how can they aid in this whole discussion? Like, how can they approach it? What are some healthy do's? What are some, like, don'ts? And yeah, let's kind of open up the door to that conversation.
Can we talk about this, actually? Because I think this is a really big deal.
Yeah,
think
for
this
sure.
is like a really big deal.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that I see, personally, right? I have a lot of very loving, very kind white people in my life. And the biggest problem that I see, and I think this is why it's so hard for people like me, is that sometimes they basically break a boundary, right? I'm not gonna go up to you, Jasper, and we're friends, and ask you, what's your deepest, darkest secret? There's too much pain there. And so sometimes, in trying to understand us, which I can see where that comes from, they basically ask the same thing, like, what's your experience like being black? And it's like, you want my deepest pain right now? Right? Like, I think first of all, to acknowledge the fact on my end of, I see the intent, but that's a boundary that we're not at that level, right? If we're best friends, then yeah, we can talk about that. But if we're not going to talk about that. So that's the first thing I would say is for us to be clear, for us to acknowledge the paradox of that, because it can be confusing, for us to be clear on where our boundaries are, and for people who are allies to begin to see that that's what you're asking. You're not just asking about my experience, you're asking about my deepest pain. I'm not entitled to tell you that, to give that to you.
I could talk about this for hours. I get really amped up about that conversation. So let me take it at a different angle, because I really love what you're talking about, and it seems like for you, you're talking about people with whom you already have a good relationship. So let's talk about the other side. And I'm about to get Jersey right here. I'm originally from Jersey, so and it's interesting because I've moved around the country, lived in different places, and I still see like certain patterns happening, and I think it all boils down to, allies really thinking about what their intention is in being involved in this person's life, but then also being able to cultivate meaningful relationships, right? Because you don't want to have a situation like this, even, within a close relationship, but say like it's a coworker or someone you don't know that well, to overestimate the closeness of the relationship and then to violate a boundary. And I've seen this among the most well-intentioned allies of just feeling like they have the right, the entitlement to knowing information about our lives, which you don't. And then also expecting us and putting the burden on us to educate you on what we're dealing with. So first, with allies, I always say, Google's your friend. Look that up, Alexa, Cortana, whatever you want to call the person. And there's a wealth of information out there just for you to understand and to know what's going on, but to know that you will never really understand how the person feels. And to really be intentional about, okay, why am I asking this person? Why am I concerned about this person that I may not know very well? Maybe let me look at my life and see how I interact and engage with people of color on a daily basis. Do I have close, meaningful relationships with people? A lot of times, white people tend to grow up and live in places that are majority white. And so they may not even be able to see people of color until, I don't know, maybe one person in the workplace or maybe college or, a trip to Europe or Africa. I really think, and we can go about this all many different ways, but I really think it's like, okay, how many people do you really know and want to know and to understand and to have close relationships? Because if you're doing this as like an arm length or an armchair psychologist thinking about how I can make an impact in my world, but not really thinking about the individual themselves, then I think it's kind of looking at yourself and looking at your biases. So I just want to bring that up because I feel like I've had so many conversations about this and telling white allies to do things, but I think it's also being able to understand your biases and to examine your discomfort, and that it's always going to be uncomfortable, and to still do it anyway, because silence is just as painful. Not doing anything is just as painful, but really, and I know that for a lot of people that might be counterintuitive or conflicting, and then once again, I think that warrants a deeper conversation.
And I would add to that, like, Brene Brown, she is a white woman, and she's a social worker. She does a lot of research, which specifically says that white people tend to overestimate the closeness of relationships that they've built with people, and that typically people of color, especially black people, would say that I need more than a year to say that we close, that we good, that we, you can ask me that type of question that Jordan was saying, where typically white people would say, if I've known this person for a year, like, oh my goodness, we're really close. Like, they overestimate the level of like closeness and connectedness that they have with the person. And so I think that that's really important. So I would really encourage allies to listen to people like Brene Brown, who just do a very good job of sharing their platform and challenging whiteness and challenging what it looks like to show up in your white body in a space where other black folks are at. I think that's really, really important. I think I've only experienced that like in a workplace from white people in like a handful of settings where white people have been able to ask me a question about diversity, and it's been genuine, and it's been respectful, and it's been intentional, or having a white person say something about like, how can I be supporting you, and be able to own like, and I know this is weird because I'm a white man and you're a black woman, but I want to support you, so tell me what it, and I'm like, like, okay. And so I think what we need from allies is we need allies to own the privilege that they have when they come into the room, own the dynamics, the power dynamics that tend to be at play in the room, and really show up to be a support. I think most importantly, thinking about stories. So Jordan talks about not just asking me my deepest, darkest pain, but then also don't ask me to come speak and share my deepest, darkest pain if you're not going to participate in like making it right, whether that's in some type of financial or something. Like, you need to be able to like give to me.
Yes.
Like, my story is important, it's costly, and it costs me something to have to tell it in spaces. And so that is not what happened here. Like, my brother has like done a lot of work to make sure that everybody gets paid to share their stories in it and with their expertise to be on the stage, which is great. But I think that that's really, really important. I have non-black, non-minority allies who have asked me to do things that have not offered to pay me for them. Mm-hmm. And that is the most level of disrespect that I can ever experience, because you are just telling me that I'm not important enough. But I still want to hear your story.
Well, are you going to hear, because this, you kind of opened up the door, which on one hand, it kind of seems like, one, we're talking about like, you know, on a personal level, like allies that like we may know, friends, like may go to church, may go to work, etc. But then there seems like there's another level of like white majority organization, like group coming in, like, how can I help? Like, I want to get behind this cause, and then they end up like, it kind of seems like that's a level of a level of the conversation that we need to address as well.
And they're so enthusiastic, right? I'm not going to answer the question right away, but I just feel, especially in the past year, you know, with the whole George Floyd thing, and then like every major organization putting out a statement of how sorry they feel, or people being approached by people who they've never talked before, and just be like, I want to help. And so I just, you know, it just makes me think about that enthusiasm, which I can see that even if it's well-intentioned, but it's just so exhausting. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way out of this, which I think is counterintuitive to this culture, is to share power. You have to share power.
Period.
I don't think, like, there's no way out of the hard work of sharing power. And I think so many organizations just aren't set up that way. But you have to set it up that way if you want to have real, sustained change, right? Do you have people on your board? Do you have people in leadership? Do you have who aren't majority culture? If not, that's a problem. And that's what you have to share power. which, gotta get paid.
You gotta get paid to share power, right? Like, I mean, I most readily think about the book that Brene Brown just recently released with the woman who started the Me Too movement. Do you know what I'm talking about? What book that is? It's a white book. And so, y'all, the book is absolutely phenomenal. I haven't even read it yet. I've read all the chapter headings. But I just want to honor Brene Brown and what she's doing, because her name is on the book first. Her picture is this big. All the chapters are written by Black men or women of multiple identities. And so it is freaking amazing that she is yo, I wrote this book. She ain't write no book. These Black people wrote this book.
Yeah.
These Black people who have credentials behind their names, who have experiences behind their, and she put her name on it. And what I imagine is that they all get paid because this book, because she's got her name on this book.
Right.
That is amazing. I'm where's Brene's Brown chapter? Her chapter is not, all these other people got their name on it.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful to me. And you see this often with Brene Brown, where she is sharing her platform and getting people on stage with her to elevate their voices. And so I'm that is what power looks like. That is what it means to share power. That is what it means to defer power. That is what it means to make sure that people get paid for what they are doing. That is how you show honor and validation and support. Because what we know is from trauma, what people need is we need to be believed. We need to be supported. And so the most belief you can give me is to give me that. And so I guess the reason why I went into that whole segment about allies and paying people is because I think that's one of the ways that allies try to go. They try to get your story. They try to take the story from you and come tell my friends, come tell my church, come tell. Well, now I'm just poured
All
out.
tailed out.
I don't have nothing else to tell.
I mean, I feel like me and you had an experience of this. 'Cause
Yeah,
we were invited
yeah.
to speak at an event, and I asked the question, and I think we have to advocate for ourselves. What's the compensation? And I'm an adult. I have bills. I also have kids that I take care of in the evening. You're right. It is not easy for me just to. And I declined the event. It was a really good event, but I declined it But I think it's not just about the money, even though sometimes you got to pay bills. It's about what are you doing tangibly? And I think about this from the lens of betrayal. I think when I work with people who've been through a betrayal, the first thing you have to do is do things differently. You have to atone in some way. And one way of doing that is through paying us. Another way is by lending your platform to someone else, right? Another way of doing that is actually changing the structure of your organization so that you have, traditionally marginalized people in leadership, but you have to do some of those larger structural changes.
I feel like it's like you said, it's not about the money, but also y'all said it's costly of us, right? There's a cost on our part, and I think part of the thing that we like to see is that we like to see it cost you something as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
We like to know that you are participating in this cost. You know what I mean? If it's costing me, whatever it's costing me, it's got to cost you something as well. If this is going to be a mutual friendship, a mutual engagement, if it's going to be mutual, it's got to cost us both something. And I think part of it is they may not see it as a cost to y'all. That's oh, you sharing your story, that's good. Come on, yeah, you sharing your story, it's no, we got to relive it, it's cumulative, it adds up, it literally affects our bodies, it costs something, and so we'd like to see that the cost be mutual. Man, I want to thank y'all so much. Thank y'all so much for participating in this, for coming out. Yeah, you can go ahead and make some noise for them. I think what we'll do is we'll open up to like if y'all have questions. If y'all got some questions, it's only a few. Look, go ahead.
What would you say about dealing with racial trauma with your children? They feel it too. My kids have said some things that have broken my heart. They've experienced things that I had to tell them, like, I know that Billy did this, but Billy's white, so you can't do that type stuff. And so I guess my question is how to care for our kids as they go through that trauma, especially because they don't always understand what's happening. They don't, and I have to be like, no, that was racism. Don't let nobody talk to you like that. Don't let nobody say that to you. Don't let nobody touch your hair or whatever. And so, yeah, that's my question. How do we care for our kids as they go through racial trauma as well?
How do we care for our kids, for people who are listening at home? And how do we care for our kids as they walk, as they deal with racial trauma? I'm gonna let you guys take this.
Okay, so I'll start. I can't really see you over here.
Yeah, I was like, I
You're my
divert to
partition.
the people that are parents or have the kids.
So okay, I have Cerinthia's kids are a little bit older than mine, but I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and when my 7-year-old started kindergarten, he told me, he was like, "Mom, it's really hard being black around white people," and I was like, "That is true." Like, I'm so sorry that you came to this conclusion at 5. And then I remember what my experience was when I was a kid, when I came to the conclusion that, like, I was black. I was about 5 when I realized that I was Jennifer L, and there were all these Jennifer A's and Jennifer P and Jennifer C, and I remember not liking my name Jennifer, which is my first name, by the way, because I attribute Jennifer being a white name. It was no longer a black name. And I was like, I don't want to be that. Like, call me Joy. And so I think that I would love to do some research about how early BIPOC children are aware of their ethnicity than their white counterparts. I talked to a white professor who told me he did not have any awareness of himself being white until he was like in his 30s. Wow. And I was like, how sway though? Like, how? And then he's like, he's talking to me, he's weeping. He's like, but Joy, that's not good. Like, that's the point. Like, I never had to have this conversation, but you have always had to have the conversation. I was like, oh. So when I talked to my son, and then my son also, the oldest, he also wants to be white. He doesn't want to be, when we moved here, he talked about wanting to be this color and not this color. And so these have just been really, really hard conversations. And one of the things I've done with him is just try to tell him, like, I understand. Like, I know, like, it's hard for us too. Like, Uncle Jasper feels it, Daddy felt, like, we all felt it. Like, trying to let him know that it's hard for us to be black too around white people. And then also giving him space to, like, continue to talk about that. And so there was, like, a long period of time when he had started school where he would talk about being black all the time. How hard it was. He didn't want to do that. He had experience where white kids were like, all the white kids said they weren't going to play with the brown kids. And daycare, like that, I was in daycare. And so just always giving him the space to, like, please tell me more. Let's talk about this, all that type of stuff. The other thing that I do with him and my youngest, they have affirmation statements where they say, like, one of the ones was God made me brown, and he did that on purpose. Mm-hmm. And that part was something that Micah created himself. He's like, because I was just like, God made you brown. Like, just remember that God did that. And he's like, yeah, and Mommy, God did that on purpose. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's really deep. Like, to remember that this was intentional, right? Because very often when I want to be white, I forget that, like, this was an intentional choice that God did. And so from there, I think what I try to do with them is I keep lots and lots of books in our household about different, they get to see little black boys or little black girls doing different things. I just think we're really blessed to have a lot of different types of, like, black and brown people in our lives. Like, someone that he really looks up to is works at NASA, and Micah wants to be a rocket scientist, and he gets to call him, he gets to talk to him, and he's black. He's a black man. I know Ren has been in group text messages where I've sent all my black friends messages about Micah. And like, y'all, just hug my son when you see him. I'm like, please. He needs to be reminded that other black people like look like him and love him. I try to have like be really intentional about their babysitters. I try to really have like a black babysitter be with them because it makes a difference to them about how comfortable they feel to play and engage. And they always tell me about how much they loved all their black babysitters because they look like them. And then from there, we continue the conversation. I think very often parents think that like you shouldn't say anything, but I think it's always okay to talk about it. We talk about slavery with our boys. We talk about racism that they've experienced. We talk about their hair and why it's important. We talk about it like that is your private space. Like no one's supposed to touch your space, so you can't touch my body parts. You can't touch my hair. Like this is my private space. Like please don't touch my hair. It is not appropriate. You're too close. So we talk about all those things to make sure that they understand. And I don't know. I try really hard to just make sure that they have black friends and white friends who understand the importance of like what it's like for them in their school. Because my kids did not experience being the only black kid until we moved to Arkansas. So it is a huge culture shock for them.
I think it comes back down to specifically with your kids, with our kids, validating their experience, which is hard to do. You know, I feel like that's not how I was raised, honestly. To talk about my emotions, to validate those emotions. And so I think that's really important, you know, for parents to do that with their kids. And I really like what you're saying, because I think it's also important to name it.
Yes.
So to name it, to validate it for your kids, kind of like you were saying about believe them, right? And believe them is not just like, of course, we're going to believe our kids, but it's like, yeah, that really hurt. Whereas sometimes parents are like, it's okay, brush it off, you're good, keep going, you're tough, which I think is conveyed with all the love in the world, and still can be really hurtful to our kids.
Yeah, I just add another layer of that. So I have Haitian parents, and so kind of the intersection of, you know, race and nationality. And I find it really interesting because, you know, while the Haitian culture, you know, is not, we're kind of hold our emotions to ourselves, just very similar to African-American community, we really did have open conversations about racism, and they were very open and blunt, almost kind of too blunt. And I think that authenticity is really helped me have that safe space. It was validating my experiences. But it also, I think they ingrained, not only to validate, but also to clap back. I don't know if any better way of saying that, right? To be able over, you know, as I grow up, to know that and stand up for myself and to be like, you know, this is not okay. And I've had that support ever since I was little, and still nowadays, you know, when I talk to my family and talk about things that happen, you know, they always kind of like, no, they validate, they say, no, it's not okay, and you have the right to speak up about it, you know, and to set those boundaries. And I know that's always something we kind of have to guard on, you know, if it's a safe space to do that, what are the benefits and the costs and stuff like that. But when it comes to speaking your truth and your experience, like, no one can be mad at you if you're speaking your truth. You know, so I always goes back to that, asserting your authenticity, your boundaries, and speaking your truth. You know, you shouldn't be ashamed to speak your truth because this is your truth.
I love what Patricia just said, though. Okay, so the clap back is really important. There is something about how do we teach our kids how to stand on what they believe and what they know. Like, it is inappropriate and it's disrespectful for you to touch my hair. My mama told me so. Please don't touch my hair. That goes for my playmates and for my teacher and for my gym, like whoever. Like, no. My mommy said you can't touch my hair, please, right? Like, we give them that permission to clap back in a very respectful way. And so I love what you're saying. And then on top of that, I wanted to add to, like, it's not, okay, you believe them and then you thank them for sharing. thank you so much for telling me this. Because what I remember growing up is like, I never had a conversation with my mom and dad about how I didn't like my first name. I just internalized it. That's a white name. I don't want to be called that. And I know I never had a conversation with my mom and dad about it because my mom heard me saying that out loud to somebody and she's like, I've always called you Joy. I didn't call you that because you, and I was like, oh, okay. And so the fact that your kids are even telling you, that's a win. So like, believe them like, oh, buddy, that's hard. And even do that same thing, right? Like how we were just talking about your body. Where do you feel that in your body? Do that with your kid. What does it hurt? Oh, what do you need? Can I hug you? Oh, that's hard, buddy. I'm so sorry. Believe them and thank them because that means that you've created the safety already, that they will always come to you and talk to you about these really hard things. You want that to continue as they get 13, 14, 15, 24. Like, well, they know, right? Because what we need is people. We need a tribe. They've been doing it since they were 5. So when they get in their 30s, they're going to be like, Mom, let me tell you. They always have you. Like, that is good. Now you become, in therapy, what we would say, like, now you become this internalized attachment figure for them. Mm-hmm. Now they carry you with them. And that is a good thing. So if you have a kid who is telling you when these things happen, like, that is so good. Thank them for sharing that and tell them they can always come to you. Like, you've already done the really good work. And if you don't have your kid telling you that or you struggle with believing them, maybe you do that thing like, man, come on, son, it's not that big of a deal, woo, woo, woo. It's okay to go back and repair and be like, son, I'm so sorry. I remember last week you were telling me about so-and-so, and I think I made you feel like you should just kind of suck that up. And I just want you to know that it's okay. Please tell me next time. That's like, always repair. What kids need, they need to know that you are with them, that you will always repair with them. Like, this is how you teach them how to like apologize and take responsibility. Like, you model it first. Like, repair, believe, and thank them for their story.
Let's take one more question. Any?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we handle and think about critical race theory? And especially in the Arkansas area where it's not taught in schools and there's a lot of pushback right now. I will say, on a personal level, the conversation is weird to me, right? Like I teach at universities, and we've taught this for years, and I've taught at predominantly white universities. So something that, like, I don't quite get how this became such a polarizing. It's like an academic theory. Like, it's not like it's a new thing. So part of me is sort of like, how did this thing that I've taught for years to white people suddenly become like the thing you should never talk about. It's very odd on a personal level. I think the flip side of that is part of me wonders, honestly, if I don't know what they are specifically talking about. Because what I know of as critical race theory is the idea, and I'm going to sum it up and sort of try to not make it too academic, that like a lot of what's happened in this country has been racially motivated. Well, I mean, yeah, like that's not a novel idea. So
Not novel to us.
it's not novel to us. I guess that's true. So yeah, part of me thinks because it's such an obvious thing. I don't know if they're talking about something that I don't. They're talking about something that I'm not aware of. Yeah.
So I guess here are my thoughts about it, because I've definitely had that thought too. Like, I don't understand where this resistance is coming from. And here's what I've been thinking about, and kind of contextualizing it with theory and you know, my experiences and observations and, you know, studies on this. I think is we as people of color from marginalized communities, we grew up knowing about the effects of racism, right? That was part of our narrative growing up, through our own experiences, hearing it from our loved ones and our family members and things like that. I don't think white people had the opportunity, no, I know they hadn't had the opportunity to think of American history in that context. And so to be exposed to this information and the idea that, hey, the history that we've learned isn't actually the history that we learned, I think it's something that's been internalized as this kind of like this identity crisis, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how can I conceptualize what I learned, how I interact in the world? It's like seeing everything in a whole new light. And that's scary for a lot of people. And so I think that's what the resistance is coming up, being like, well, no, like, you know, it's kind of this denial of like, well, no, that's not, you know, it's their own experiences, right? There's no historical or any kind of backings in that. But we've grown up and we've known this for a very long time. And we were able to kind of build resilience about that, learning the hard truths from very young and being able to cope with it in the way that it can. And now for people waking up in racism in real time and really understanding how pervasive and systematic it is, it's seeing that identity crisis. So I think that has a lot to what it's doing. But I think in terms of, you know, I do trainings, I teach courses, and I've always infused parts of critical race theory. And I'm going to continue to do so, you know, until someone comes knocking on my door. Because I think it's still important for us to have those conversations. Plus, these policies and things, there's still kind of a lot of debate or talking about what that means and implication, because it's so broad, right? It's like, so am I going to stop talking about what I'm going to talk about while people are trying to figure out how this law is going to impact us? No, I'm still going to have those conversations. So that's how I kind of deal with that through my own teaching and resistance.
I agree with everything that they said. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I do, after hearing you talk, I do think you hit on something very important, right? That these things hit on issues of identity. And I think that right next to identity is always shame.
Always.
And I guess the thing I would say is, as we try to be a country that lives up to its ideals, I think we have to have this conversation, right? We have to really acknowledge the way that race has influenced everything. And I think we also have to name and just be very frank that these issues do bring up a lot of shame with people. And I think when we can do that, then we have a shot. And I 100% know that that's a very hard thing to do, and takes talented, skilled mediators to do that. But we have to name that monster in the room. There's a lot of shame attached to this thing, honestly, on all sides. And And if we want a shot at being who we want to be, who we feel like we are in our souls, we have to name that there's a big shame monster in the room. That's the first step.
That's really good. I'm checking to see. Oh wait, we got one. One question online. Let's see. We're gonna do this last one, and then we're gonna get out of here. What's the long-term problem with being perceived strong, specifically for a Black woman?
So I answered that question. Oh, that question in
Got it,
my soul.
Patricia.
Yeah, I guess I'll take the reins because of that. Yeah, because I mean, I think it's something that's also, I've been also struggling with. You know, there was a long time of me kind of fighting, being like, I'm not that stereotype. I'm not the stereotype of a strong Black woman, and I embrace that. But there are long-term effects, and I think it's because of the trope. And it's very interesting because I've read about it, and the strong Black woman trope is something that did come and was coined by Black creators. Right? Like if we talk about the movie and film industry, like in the 70s, the Shaft and all those types of films, and I think Foxy Brown. So, you know, and it came out of this kind of resistance of like, you know what, I'm not gonna let anything tear me down. Like I'm gonna be independent, I'm gonna be strong, I'm gonna go through this. And I think that's an amazing thing. But then I also think that on the flip side of it, you know, it also shows like we have to keep on this armor, right? That we're supposed to just not show anything. We're supposed to take everything and not say anything, or not to show weakness, or not to show sadness. Sadness is a form of weakness. And so that's where it becomes problematic, right? We as Black women, like many other people, are multifaceted. We're very complex and very layered. And so for us to kind of, on the one hand, it's like, yes, we want to embrace our frankness, our authenticity, our, you know, strong women. I think it's the same time to be able to open up and be like, you know what, I'm not okay, and being okay and being vulnerable. Because I think if you hold on to that trope and that stereotype, you're going to hold things in. And kind of like the conversations we've been having about, you know, the physical and mental effects of racial trauma is going to build up too, right? Because you're not addressing that. You're more like taking it in like, I'm not going to feel it, I'm going to push forward, versus like, I need to process this. I'm going through a lot of these things. It's not okay, but it's okay to feel the way that I feel, and being able to open and support each other too. Because I also think in circles of women, we can be like, oh no, you know, forget about it. Like, you know, it's not a big deal. But I think being able to create spaces for one another to be vulnerable, right? So that we can share this with each other and move forward.
I would add to that. I think that our strength really means that we experience emotions with some intensity. And I think when it comes to being vulnerable, then our vulnerability is also with intensity. And oftentimes people don't know what to do with that. You're only used to me being strong and being put together and saying the right things. And so then when I'm falling apart, because I'm human, now that's with like a level 10, and you're like, oh my God, like what's wrong with her? Like I can't, stop it, you know? And I think what Black women need is, we need spaces where people can make room for my strength, but then also make room for my vulnerability, make room for the intensity of my vulnerability. And like, there's not a lot of people who can handle the intensity of what it means for me to be vulnerable. So for me to like be angry, for me to be sad, for me to be anxious and overwhelmed, like a lot of people can't handle that part of joy. And often people, when they see me, they only see strength. And so my closest friends and family, they have a way of seeing past my strength. Because for anybody who sees me, they always think I look strong. I'm good. But my closest friends and family can see past that and can ask the right questions. And now I can be vulnerable with much intensity. And what I would say, the research would say, is that we need people to help contain it. I don't need you to tell me that I'm going to be okay. I know that I probably will, but that's not what I need you to tell me in that moment. Can you just sit with me in it? Can you be with me? And I think so the long-term effects of that, of what I've seen, is Black women are tired. We are exhausted. And we are literally hurting from the inside out. Trying to find words for something that doesn't make sense. Trying to carry ourselves and carrying everybody else with us. It is exhausting. And so I think what you tend to see is, I've been throwing out Girl Trek. So Girl Trek is all about helping Black women start walking to help lessen the effects of like stress that's on our bodies because of us as Black women. So what you start to see is that we die sooner. So I love Girl Trek's story because I think they did like a TED Talk, and they start off saying who they are in relation to their grandmothers, and they say like all their grandmothers' names, and then they say I'm the daughter of so and so and so and so. Then they say what ages their grandmothers died, and it's like 50s, 60s, and it's like heart-wrenching. And you know that had to do with like racial stress, being a strong Black woman, carrying the whole weight of the world, getting everybody through. You know that was attributed to that. And so just giving yourself the permission to not carry anyone, and realizing that when you do that, when you can be on the airplane, you put on your own mask. When you put on your own mask, then you're more able to help other people. And actually, you're teaching other people how to put on their mask too, because you've taken the time to take care of yourself. So I love everything that Patricia said. I would just say that like we are tired. And I mean, I think Simone Biles said it this week at the Olympics, right? Of like, she is done, like, not at the cost of her mental health. It is too costly. I think that's what I hope that Black women hear tonight is like, you are too costly to keep going on just being strong for everyone else. And the way you can be strong for you is that you find a therapist, find your tribe, listen to your body, take care of yourself. Like, you are worthy of slowing down and not carrying everybody.
Yeah. I know, right? Yeah. All of you guys, like, you can tell that you guys are like therapists because you all have like such calming voices and like, and you all like speak like, man, like I instantly like felt lighter. I'm like, man, like, yo, you can relax right now. Like, I just want to thank y'all. Thank y'all for sharing this knowledge. Thank y'all for sharing your resources. I want to do real quick for the people online and for everybody in here. Can y'all just give y'all like social media handles, websites, whatever? Like, how can people get connected with y'all? And how can they use you as a resource? And for white organizations, how can they pay you if you want to put your Cash App? Yeah.
You can pay all of us. Any of us will come and speak at the right price. And any of us will gladly take any donations so that we can make sure that our communities are supported. I think what Jordan said is really important, right? Can organizations that want to help trust minority leadership with the money to do what's right? And I think that's important. Okay, my name is Joy McGowan. I have a website called joymcgowan.com. I have started like a mental health blog that I'll be kicking off with another colleague of mine in Chicago. And you can follow me at joymcgowan.com to listen to some more of our mental health blogs that will talk about family and just being Black and why mental health is important for us. And yeah, joymcgowan.com. You can email me from there and all that type of stuff. So thank you. J-O-I. Sorry.
Yeah, J-O-I.
J-O-I. I'm also really difficult. It's JOIMCGOWAN.com.
Yeah, I'm really not on social media for some of the reasons that we talked about, honestly. It's just, I think it's, personally, I think it's too much. But you can find me at jordanthecounselor.com. And yeah, I also have a podcast for therapists called the Informed Simplicity Project. So.
Look at y'all. So yes, I should definitely get on that, personal front. So I'm a clinician. I work at the University of Arkansas, and so I will direct you to our social media. So we are on Instagram at U of A Caps, CAPS. We're also on YouTube at U of A Caps, and so that one specifically, I've launched 2 YouTube series, Mental Health Mondays and The Struggle is Really Diverse. And so The Struggle is Really Diverse YouTube series is specifically talking about mental health topics among diverse communities like BIPOC, and other types of diverse identities. And so I really encourage you to follow us on YouTube at U of A Caps and to watch that series. Both series have, first season is out, 21 episodes in each series, so feel free to look at that info.
Whoa, let's make some noise for them, y'all. This is so great. Thank y'all again for coming. Thank y'all for coming. Thank y'all for watching. This is Together We Can. We'll be back in 2 weeks on August 19th at the Jones Center in Springdale with a panel talking about collaboration between minoritized group. Minoritized is a new term that I've learned. But apparently, like, it's not that we are like the minority now anymore, but like we are still minoritized. And so we'll be with a bunch of people talking about how we can collaborate more as minoritized groups and how we can dismantle forms of oppression. And so, yeah, you can find out more information on that by following me on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, at Jasper Logan Raps, or jasperlogan.com, and all this will be on there. Again, this is our night. Thank y'all for coming, and we're out of here.